In female reproductive system, there are two reproductive cycles that occur every month, or each cycle occur between 1 until 28 days. The two types of reproductive cycle are ovarian cycle is a female reproductive cycle that happened in ovary. Menstrual or uterine cycle is a female reproductive cycle that happened in the uterus. So this is the uterus. Each cycle is divided into three phases. Ovarian cycle divides into follicular phase, ovulation phase, and luteal phase. Menstrual or uterine cycle divides into menstruation phase, proliferative phase, and secretory phase. In ovarian cycle, the follicular phase is the first phase where the follicle will develop from primary to a mature follicle, and at the day 14, the second phase will occur, which is ovulation. The mature follicle will rupture and release the secondary oocyte. And then the third phase is luteal phase, where the ruptured follicle will convert it into corpus luteum until the corpus luteum degenerate. In uterine or menstrual cycle, the first phase is menstrual phase, where the first day of menstruation is the first day of menstrual cycle. At this phase, the inner lining endometrium wall will be ruptured and discharged from the uterus, and this phase took for about 5 days, but different women will have different days. This is the common for all women. After menstrual phase is proliferative phase, where at this phase, the inner lining of endometrium wall started to thicken again. At day 14 and above, the third phase will occur, which is secretory phase, where at this phase, the inner membrane of endometrium wall continue to thicken and maintained. At this phase, the endometrium wall will be ready for implantation of embryo and to supply nutrients for the development of embryo if fertilization occur. So each cycle, which occurs simultaneously, took about 28 days, and it begins at first day of menstruation. This cycle's activity is controlled by a few types of hormones. The first hormone is GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, secreted by hypothalamus to stimulate the anterior pituitary. The second hormone is FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, secreted by anterior pituitary to stimulate development of follicle in ovary. The third hormone is LH, luteinizing hormone, secreted by anterior pituitary, stimulate the ovulation in ovary. Estrogen, secreted by follicle cells in ovary, stimulate the thickening of endometrium wall of uterus. Progesterone, secreted by corpus luteum in ovary, to maintain the thickness of endometrium wall of uterus. There are 5 hormones involved in regulating the ovarian and uterine cycle. GnRH, FSH, and LH also found in male and involved in spermatogenesis activity, but each hormone has different function in male and in female. Let's look at this diagram. A and B is about hormone that release from anterior pituitary gland and hypothalamus. C is the ovarian cycle, and then D is hormones secreted from ovary. So step 1 is hypothalamus secrete GnRH to stimulate the anterior pituitary gland. Anterior pituitary gland will secrete FSH and LH, and at the early cycle, FSH level is higher compared to LH. High level of FSH at the early phase will stimulate the development of follicle in the ovary, and the follicle will secrete estrogen. As the follicle growing, the follicle will be enlarged in size, causing the secretion of estrogen also will be increased. Once the follicle develop into a mature follicle, or also known as Graafian follicle, the Graafian follicle will secrete a high level of estrogen. High level of estrogen will stimulate the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland to secrete more LH. The surge level of LH will stimulate ovulation in the ovary. mature Ovarian follicle will rupture and release secondary oocyte into the fallopian tube. The surge level of LH also stimulate the ruptured Ovarian follicle to be converted to corpus luteum. Corpus luteum secrete progesterone and estrogen, but level of progesterone is higher compared to estrogen. At this phase, high level of progesterone and estrogen will give negative feedback to hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland, where high level of progesterone and estrogen during luteal phase will inhibit hypothalamus from secreting GnRH and inhibit anterior pituitary gland from secreting FSH and LH. That's why during luteal phase, level of GnRH, FSH, LH is always low. This is to ensure there will be no development of new follicle during luteal phase. So, if there is no fertilization of the secondary oocyte in the fallopian tube, the corpus luteum will be converted to corpus albicans and then degenerate. When the corpus luteum degenerate, secretion of the progesterone and estrogen slowly decrease. At low level of progesterone and estrogen, it will remove the negative feedback to hypothalamus and anterior pituitary glands. Hence, hypothalamus will start to secrete GnRH once again, which stimulate anterior pituitary gland to secrete FSH and LH once again, and a new cycle will begin. So let's read one by one of the steps in ovarian cycle. Number 1, hypothalamus secrete GnRH to stimulate anterior pituitary gland. Number 2, anterior pituitary gland secrete high level of FSH and low level of LH. Number 3, FSH stimulate the growing of follicle in ovary. Number 4, follicle secrete estrogen, and as the follicle grows, more estrogen will be secreted, hence the level of estrogen is increasing. The estrogen repairs and thickens endometrium wall in uterus. Step number 5, mature Ovarian follicle, which consists secondary oocyte, secrete even more estrogen. At high level of estrogen, it will stimulate hypothalamus to secrete more GnRH, which stimulate anterior pituitary gland to secrete more LH. Step number 6, surge level of LH will stimulate ovulation, where the mature follicle rupture and release the secondary oocyte to fallopian tube. Step number 7, high level of LH also stimulate the ruptured maturing follicle converted into corpus luteum, and the luteal phase begins. Step number 8, corpus luteum secrete progesterone and estrogen, but level of progesterone is higher than estrogen. High level of progesterone and estrogen will inhibit hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland. This is negative feedback. Hence, level of GnRH, FSH and LH is low during luteal phase. Low level of FSH to ensure no development of new follicle at this phase. Step number 10, if no fertilization occur, corpus luteum converted to corpus albicans and degenerates, causing level of progesterone and estrogen drop, and at the low level of progesterone and estrogen, this will stimulate the hypothalamus to secrete GnRH once again, and a new cycle will begin. So, what happened in the ovarian cycle if fertilization of secondary oocyte occur in the fallopian tube? If fertilization occur, corpus luteum lifespan extended into 3 months and continue to secrete progesterone and estrogen to maintain thickness of endometrium wall. Hence, no new cycle will begin. The second female reproductive cycle is menstrual or uterine cycle. So this cycle occurs in the uterus, specifically in the endometrium wall. So this is the endometrium wall or the inner lining of uterus. At early phase, the level of estrogen is low, causing the endometrium wall is ruptured and discharged. So the first day of menstruation is the starting of menstrual flow phase or starting of the menstrual cycle. As the estrogen level is increasing, the endometrium wall will be repaired and thicken again. This is in proliferative phase. At the same time, during proliferative phase, network of blood vessels started to form. When the progesterone level is higher than the estrogen, the thickness of the endometrium wall will be maintained, which is in secretory phase. Maintaining the thickness of this endometrium wall is very important at this phase to facilitate and support implantation and development of embryo in the uterus. But if there is no fertilization occur, corpus luteum in ovary degenerate, causing the level of progesterone and estrogen also decrease into low level. So at low level of progesterone and estrogen, the thickness of the endometrium wall cannot be maintained anymore. Hence, the endometrium wall will be shedded and discharged. Means another cycle will begins again. So let's look step by step in each phases of menstrual cycle. The first phase is menstruation phase. Endometrium inner lining wall shedded. Estrogen and progesterone level is low, which stimulate the endometrium wall ruptured and shedded, causing the inner lining of endometrium wall is thinning. Second phase is proliferative phase. The endometrium inner lining wall repairs and thickens. In ovary, during follicular phase, follicle keeps secreting estrogen. Increasing level of estrogen stimulate repairs and thickens of endometrium inner lining wall. Network of blood vessels formed in the endometrium inner lining wall as well. The third phase is secretory phase. Endometrium inner lining wall thickness is maintained. In ovary, during luteal phase, the corpus luteum secretes more progesterone and less estrogen. High level of progesterone maintains the thickening of endometrium inner lining wall. If no fertilization occur, corpus luteum degenerates, causing no secretion of progesterone and estrogen. Decreasing level of progesterone and estrogen, causing endometrium inner wall shedded, and another cycle will begin. If fertilization occur, corpus luteum continues to secrete progesterone and estrogen to maintain thickness of endometrium inner lining wall, and another cycle will not begin.